My name is Wendy, and I work with ePracticeManager. Many of you know me as someone who's been in touch with your practice for coaching purposes. And today we are going to talk about managing patient accounts. I'm going to ask everyone in attendance to mute their microphones so that we don't have background noise as we're going along. We will most definitely have a section for questions at the end. And also, if you have a question during the presentation, please feel free to ask about that and just unmute your microphone at the time and then proceed from there. So this is an important subject for practices, and we're happy to be doing a presentation about this today. One of the problems that we face is that there's so much variety in this subject having to do with the type of practice and the size of practice. So we're going to fly over some basic information about this and hope that we can be of help to you on some, typical scenarios that practices run into. If you need personalized help, certainly through your coaching, you have access to that, and we'd like to hear from you afterwards. And I'll put up my contact information at the end so that we can make sure that we see all of that. All right, so one of the things that is important to talk about is that case acceptance is largely a matter of managing patient accounts is largely a matter of handling flow. And it doesn't always seem like that, but the primary principle that we're talking about in managing patient accounts is that money that we receive today is different than money that we receive at a different time. Certainly money that takes us longer and longer to get becomes more and more expensive. So it's important to have a format in your practice for managing patient accounts. Now, most of us have this just by a survival mechanism. You have to talk to patients about insurance, you have to talk to them about money, you have to collect money. And so there's some form of this in place in every practice. So let's just kind of start at the beginning, run through the whole thing. First of all is patient intake. It's important for us to make financial matters part of how we intake our patients. So your patient calls you on the phone, they haven't been to your practice before, or even if they have, and they oftentimes have questions about insurance. They have questions about your fees. So we offer an awful lot through ePracticeManager in the courses that we offer, as well as the online job descriptions that has content about how to handle those calls that are coming in. But one of the things that we like to encourage the most is to let your patients know that as part of coming into your practice, you have them complete their patient information in advance and send that in to you. Now, some practices are quite sophisticated with this, and they have the ability through their website for patients to complete a variety of different paperwork and then have it pull through directly into their practice management software. Others have forms that are available and they still have to be sent in, and then the data entry has to be done by a front office person. But in either case, it is important to talk to them about the idea that just coming in and getting handed a clipboard and filling out their information at that time actually slows things down for them, and you're less capable of providing them with the information that's needed. So encouraging patients to fill out their information ahead of time, send it into you in advance. That gives you an opportunity to take a look at the financial parts that are involved with this. So it may be a matter of verifying their insurance. Lots of practices do that in advance before a patient ever enters the building. They've got an idea of this person's insurance coverage and if they have multiple coverage, that kind of thing. It's a nice customer service step for you to take if you have the staff to do it. The biggest thing is, as a customer service issue, it avoids you running around in a very rushed manner when the patient is there. They've already had an exam, some treatment has been recommended for them, and now you need to find out what's involved with the financial side of things. Oftentimes, if you're rushing, you can make mistakes. Oftentimes, if you have to gather up information, you can't get all of the pieces of information that you need right at that time. So it presents a less professional front to the patient, and we'd like to avoid that if at all possible. Lots of practices determine insurance. They also will take the opportunity to prepare a treatment plan in advance for the patient. Once you've had enough communication with the patient, you can set some of the basic parameters in play and have a treatment plan ready. It can certainly include their name, their insurance, the coverage that they have, and then it's just a matter at the last minute of putting in any procedures that are required for their care and talking to them about the cost, the insurance portion, and then what they have remaining. So the more advanced work that you can do, the more prepared you are, the more in communication you are with your patients, the more smooth flowing it is, you tend to have better success in getting patients to follow through with the treatment that they need. There are a lot of upgrades through your practice management software and also through apps that are available where you can actually have a button, and right in the middle of your phone call with that person, you can have information about the type of plan that they have and what their basic coverage is. You can do that when you're preparing a treatment plan at the time or in advance. There's often a fee for that subscription. Many practices find it to be of value. One of the biggest things that we find is that you're able to find out if the person has the insurance that they say that they have. Oftentimes people will have an idea of the insurance, even the company or the policy that they participate with, and that's inaccurate. So you go ahead, you file a claim, you receive it back, you have to call the patient, you find out more about what insurance they do have, or they find out for the first time that they don't have coverage, and it all becomes quite complicated at that point. So sometimes these apps and additional subscription services are worthwhile just for that part of the equation. We are interested to find that lots of surveys are done with dental practices to find out how many of them file their insurance claims electronically. We do find that almost everybody says that they do, and this is throughout national surveys and our experience as well. But if you ask a practice if they file every single claim electronically, you find that many don't, and that there are still situations where they have quite a complicated filing process to submit an insurance claim. So with that in mind, it's important to take a look at that. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is. The reason why is because that'll show you where you have difficulties and the potential for improvement. Sometimes whether or not it's that you can't file electronically or you simply get claims returned to you frequently, that will show up holes in the machinery within your practice and give you an idea of things that you want to optimize. So for example, if particular imaging is required in order for you to submit a claim, there are a lot of IT services and bridge integration services through IT companies that will help you to consolidate how you keep your patient charts, so that instead of having your images in one place and patient account information in another place and charting in another place, you can actually consolidate those things and have access to them all at one time. So that if you do find yourself in the situation where you have to resubmit a claim, it's right there at your fingertips instead of having to reconstruct the whole thing at that time. Or you're able to prepare and submit a complete claim at the time. Now, sometimes this comes down to a matter of an insurance plan that just has a particular mechanism for how they require that you submit claims in the first place. And a lot of times those are plans that you may or may not even want to be participating with. So with that being the case, it's something to take a look at when you're running into that exception, that difficulty, that type of problem. It may be a place to look for where you can streamline things within your own practice operations and make that easier, or you may decide to eliminate that from the practice altogether. Do you handle your resubmissions in a timely manner? That is something that gets set to the side, and we know that there's a bit of research involved, so we don't always get to it quickly. Well, the more time that you add to an insurance claim submission or resubmission, the more difficult it gets to get that considered and paid. So we do need to have somebody who can, on a weekly basis, have the opportunity to take a look at what's been returned to you and why, and do two things with that. The first thing would be to find out what in your practice needs to be adjusted so that you don't generate future resubmissions, and how to handle the ones that you have, whether or not that's weekly or monthly. A closer time interval, consider doing that weekly instead of monthly, will improve the cash flow in the practice as well. So, another thing that we want to talk about is patient designations. Sometimes you have an opportunity to designate a patient within your practice management software as a cash patient or as an insurance patient. When you're checking patients in and checking patients out, some practice management software systems actually force you to make this type of a designation. Sometimes a person comes to you as an insurance patient and then loses that insurance, or the opposite is true and they're a cash patient and they become an insurance patient over time. Your reporting in your practice is only as good as the data entry that you have that's taking place with your patient accounts. So it's important for you to have a mechanism within the front office to properly designate the financial characteristics of the patients that you're working with. When you do this, you've got more accuracy in reporting. So one of the things that we like to recommend is to take a look at your aging report. Now, most practices run this report, but there are a couple of things that we can probably add to the mix or refine just a little bit that will be of greater use to you. So the first thing is, do you break down your aging report by cash that's owed to you by patients directly and by insurance? Most times that report is generated and it includes everything. If you have the opportunity to break it out, we do recommend that you do. We have an AR tracking system for you that we can make available to you that will have a breakdown of cash that's owed by patients, insurance claims that are outstanding, and your total accounts receivable. So one of the things that's interesting about this is that practices will run this report, they'll take a look at it, they'll decide what kind of shape they're in based on what they see, and then they'll put that report away or get rid of it, shred it altogether. Then you run the report next month and you're taking a look at it and things seem scary or things seem fantastic, and you've handled that and you move on. So one thing that we can help you to do through this tracking is to break it down by patients and insurance, but then also have an ongoing graph of your total accounts receivable. So, and we do graph the patient portion and we do graph the insurance portion, but this funny looking graph actually has the ability to show you where your total accounts receivable lie and then how it's broken down into what's current, what's 30 days out, what's 60 days out, what's 90 days out, and what's greater than that. So with this in mind, we now start to see a trend of what's taking place and where you need to focus your attention. Currently, it's ideal, obviously, for you to take your total accounts receivable, which is the line that you see at the top, and have the very next line be what's current. That would be an ideal situation in a practice. If you don't have that sequence of these colored lines on your graph, you know that you've got an area of the practice and an area of your patient accounting that you need to take care of. So we like to make this available to you as a tool. If you don't have it and you're not using it as part of ePracticeManager, I'd like to recommend it for you. Please contact me and we can make that available. But this takes you into lots of different territory, like when do you manage your accounts? Well, when you have current accounts, one thing to know about that is that sometimes there's an insurance claim that's pending for someone, and it doesn't actually go what we call live until about the 30 to 60 day mark because it hasn't been received, it hasn't been processed, you don't have all the details, and it's difficult for you to address the patient portion that's due or any discrepancies that exist. So one of the things that we've noticed is that oftentimes a financial department in a practice is quite understaffed. You can be having somebody at the front desk who's doing the lion's share of managing the insurance claims and the patient payments. And with that being the case, sometimes this doesn't get the attention that it deserves. So typically, if you have limited time or if you're doing too little of this, a great place for you to start working with your patient accounts is at the 60-day mark. What that means is that it hasn't gone to 90 days, it hasn't gone to 120 days, and those are the places where patient attention starts to wane and where they don't necessarily think that they owe you money. Whether or not that's true, no matter how many times you have them sign something, no matter how many conversations you have, the urgency and the truth of that starts to go away for the person. So at 60 days, they still are recent enough to the treatment that they've had and the experience that they've had with your office. The insurance should have been processed and received by this time, and now you've got, with some accuracy, something that you can talk about. This also takes us into the territory of what are you going to do if a claim and an account goes beyond 60 days. So we offer letters to you that you can use, you can edit them, you can customize them so that immediately after you make contact with someone at the 60-day mark, you've got a follow-up letter that you can send. If it goes into further territory, you've got an escalation of letters that you can send to the person about what action you're going to take with their account. And there are a lot of options. You can let them know that you can't continue to offer them service. Some practices are quite open with sending patient accounts to collections, that kind of thing. And we can discuss those details as part of your coaching and come up with a plan for what you want to have in place. One of the big points to consider about this is, what are your financial policies for patients? Do you have them? Have you sat down and talked about them amongst yourselves? Have you determined what you want your approach to patient accounts to be? Have you written it down? Have you put it in a brochure as part of the overall approach that new patients are introduced to when they come into your practice? Do you provide it to them in writing? Do they sign your financial policies? And all of those are important steps to take, but it's equally important for you to apply your own financial policies. Sometimes it's not always a matter of just not having the policies in place or having them available to the patients. It's that busy practices or practices that have concerns about their image with their patients will sometimes not apply their own policies. So I'd like to encourage you, at whatever pace you can, to identify and more and more and more apply your own financial policies. Now, sometimes this comes down to a matter of the difference between doctor communication with patients and front office staff communication with patients. And sometimes it does require a conversation with a doctor about his or her communication with patients, sometimes with all the right intentions. Doctors are saying either inaccurate things to patients, or they're taking it a little further than they really need to, sometimes offering discounts, sometimes offering payment plans. And it's not that that can't happen in a practice. And in fact, it does happen in a practice, and it's the doctor's practice. So there's going to be some of that that occurs. But oftentimes doctors don't realize how much they're doing of it. They don't realize how much the patient is affected by it and what their expectations are for the next situation that they may have in your office. So I can't stress enough that the development of your policies, but also the use of your policies, is something that needs to be focused on if you really want to have a good situation with managing your patient accounts. And sometimes it's a matter of slow and steady progress, but it is worth starting now. What's the alternative? Just to keep doing things the way that we've always done it? That doesn't typically seem to be the best scenario. So if you require assistance with this, either with the tracking system, with the letters, with the communication with doctors, that kind of thing, then we'd like to encourage you to work with your ePracticeManager coach to find out the proper sequence of things and how we can move all of that forward for you. So with that being the case, what about when you have patient difficulty? What about when a patient wants a refund? What about when a patient has a complaint? What about when your insurance estimations are off in large degree and you just owe patients refunds for miscalculations? These are communication processes that we include in some of the training courses that we have on ePracticeManager. It is important for us to let patients know from the beginning exactly what they can expect, not only from their insurance company, but from your own accounting department. And sometimes we're worried about what patients will think about what we have to say, so we don't always stress the details quite enough. And that's done, again, with the right intention. We want to make sure that the person gets the care that they need and that they feel comfortable doing it, that they're financially able to do it. But this can turn into a bit of a bait and switch situation with your patients if you're not upfront with them. So oftentimes this ties back into case presentation in general. And we've talked about this quite a few times, either through ePracticeManager training courses or through the online training sessions that we provide. When we talk to patients about the care that they need, it's important for them to make a decision to move forward with their treatment for the right reasons, and not to have that decision hinging on whether or not they have insurance. So one of the best ways, in fact, to make that the case is to really limit their expectations of what insurance will provide. We talk quite openly with patients about the idea that insurance is a complicated subject, that what you see is not what you get, that insurance companies make every effort to deny claims when they have the opportunity. They will delay payments and ask for an awful lot of complex communication in order to pay a claim. So sometimes having that conversation with the patient actually helps. And you say, great, here's, what's involved with the treatment that you need. Now, it looks like this is what we can expect as far as insurance coverage, but I want to let you know this is your responsibility, and we have to talk together about how to get you this treatment without the insurance being the only factor that's involved, because it's unpredictable, and we're going to work very hard to get you every single thing that we can, but it's not a certainty even when it seems like it is. And if you shape patient expectations in that way, when it comes down to the end point where an insurance claim isn't what they thought it would be, the balance owing or the portion paid doesn't seem to make sense, they have to get involved with contacting an insurance company, there's a delay, that kind of thing, then you've got somebody who's kind of got this in mind and is not quite as upset. If you do calculate insurance and you end up with patients who owe you money, right? You owe them money, you owe them a refund. It's important to process those in a timely manner. That's actually not your money, and it is their money, and there is no quicker way to upset a patient than by being dishonest about when a refund is owed or delaying the payment of that refund. Now, practices do not set out to do this intentionally. Most practices just have nothing but integrity and the best of intentions in mind. But sometimes in a busy practice, we are delayed in informing patients about these outcomes and about getting their refunds processed. So that's something that I would like to emphasize is of benefit to you to pay attention to. It actually kind of touches the PR department in your practice and is the beginning of how you market your services because of your trustworthiness and your openness with your patients. If you do have patients that have complaints, your documentation is everything. So we need to make sure that accounts are kept accurately, that notes are made available to anyone who answers the phone and might be faced with a patient question. If it escalates beyond a certain point, it is a good idea to have the office manager speak with that patient. And it's okay to tell the patient that you're going to have to get the account looked into and have the office manager contact that person. This sometimes avoids you getting into a back and forth with the patient that can cause further concern on their part. So it's a good idea to take down the information, get the patient's side of the story, let them know that they're going to receive a call back in 24 to 48 hours, reconstruct the information that you need, and get the office manager to call. And sometimes cooler heads prevail under those circumstances. But with that being the case, you can avoid this escalation to the office manager if you have very, very good documentation all along the way. When somebody makes a payment, when an insurance claim is resubmitted, when details come to light, if all of that is noted in your patient accounting, you're certainly more armed to speak intelligently about what's taking place with that account. And that's an asset to the patient. It's customer service and something that they appreciate quite a bit. When we're talking about all of this, if you're designating your patients properly, if you're noting their accounts properly, if you're working the accounts both on the insurance and the cash side of things properly, the other thing that we have to do is take a look at the review process. So it is a good idea for an office manager and or a financial coordinator to sit with the doctor periodically and make him or her aware of these numbers. Sometimes this graph is something that the doctor hasn't seen before. Sometimes they are not familiar with an aging report. Sometimes you have write-offs that you need to do that remain on your account aging, and it gives the false picture. So we'd like to make some decisions about that and get as close to accuracy as we possibly can so that the doctor has a running knowledge of what's taking place with patient accounts. This really does shape ongoing patient conversations so that the doctor has some experience. And when they are faced with a patient conversation, you've got a patient in the chair, there's an awful lot taking place right in that moment. It still has the background information of what's involved with managing patient accounts properly and meeting and exceeding their expectations. So this periodic review should take place at least monthly with the doctor. We should use this graph and the corresponding tracking system. We should be informative with the doctor about the processes that are being used, the letters and phone calls that are being done with insurance companies and patients. And that's a way to keep everyone on the same page, give instructions to one another, give follow-up communication to one another and results. So I guess one of the biggest things that we need to talk about at this point is that someone needs to be in charge of this activity. Somebody needs to own this graph and responsibility. Somebody needs to think about it. Somebody needs to worry about it. Of course, not too much because you've got it so straightened up and it's working well. But it's an important thing. Sometimes this is a shared responsibility in a practice, and whoever happens to be at the front desk or dealing with that particular patient is responsible for that account, but not necessarily the entire body of work. So even in a small practice, it is appropriate to assign a lead representative to the patient and insurance accounts, somebody who can keep the statistics, somebody who can watch the trend of what's taking place, somebody who can conduct the briefings and the meetings with the doctor and make decisions about how we're going to move forward with various things. And even in a very, very small practice, and sometimes in a very large practice, it is important that if this is a shared responsibility, meaning that the person who ends up with this responsibility might have more than one job. They might have more than one part of the practice that they're working in. Another strategic way that you can address that is simply by having the person set aside a particular block of time every week to work on this responsibility. So you may take a day of the week, say Wednesdays, and let them do this kind of work. At that time, the person really does need to disappear from the other parts of their work so that they can have some uninterrupted, concentrated time focusing on this subject and on the results that they're trying to achieve. If it's not feasible for that person to disappear from practice operations for an entire day, you may set aside a couple of hours on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, or whatever the case may be. Giving constant, detailed attention to this that is consistent is key to a person being able to maintain the thought processes and follow-up actions that are required. So again, there's so much variety in all of this within various practice situations and models. There's a lot that we can do with your coaching arrangement, and we'd like to. So with that being the case, if we have any questions, I'd like to take those up now. We'd like for you to be in touch with your coach about how to implement this account tracking within your practice and start using the graphs and the meetings as appropriate. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask about right now? It may be that your question is something that we put aside for your coaching session, or it may be something that's applicable to everybody. We'll just have to see. Anyone with feedback like that? All right. Well, please do send us any questions and input that you have. You see the email address here on the screen. I can also be reached at wendy@ePracticeManager.com. I've enjoyed having a chance to go over some of this with you today, and I appreciate your time. Do let us know if you need our help. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.